Okay. So we are on. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Gueni Vision. My name is David Gueni. I am honored. I am thrilled. I'm excited to be here, not just with excellent friends. I am here with 3 patriots from my country, and we are going to be doing some quote-unquote deconstruction here today on the channel. And I'm not going to be intervening much. I will leave this task to my friend Pavel Quintero, who is in Argentina. And we have 2 deluxe speakers today, Noel Leal from Venezuela and Jorge Rojas in Spain. And we are going to be doing this in the format of the 2 languages. So I will be your amateur simultaneous translator today, interpreter, and first time doing it, so bear with me. Bueno, buenos días a toda la gente que nos ve en Genivisión. Tengo el honor, estoy muy emocionado por esta oportunidad. Estoy no solamente con 3 grandes amigos, estoy con 3 patriotas venezolanos, gente muy veterana de la lucha en Venezuela. Y bueno, les comento que no voy a estar interviniendo en la conversación, voy a ser de intérprete de traductor simultáneo para la gente que nos escucha en inglés, para que todo sea más fácil de procesar. Y la persona que va a moderar va a ser mi amigo Pavel Quintero desde Argentina, y estoy con 2 expertos en el tema, Noel Leal desde Venezuela, Jorge Rojas desde España. De nuevo les comento, es la primera vez haciendo esto, así que paciencia, pero creo que esto va a salir excelente y bueno, estoy seguro de que la información va a ser de oro para quienes nos escuchan, quienes saben del tema y por supuesto para quienes están siendo introducidos en el tema. Bueno, Pavel, adelante.
Saludos David, Jorge, Noel, un placer. Esta conversación me gustaría iniciarla con una pregunta sobre el contexto histórico, pero constitucional de lo que de Venezuela. ¿Cómo ha sido ese proceso constitucional durante lo que nosotros podemos llamar la era democrática de Venezuela y luego lo que es el chavismo?
Noel, Jorge, good morning, good afternoon, time differences included here. I would like to start this conversation by talking about the constitutional context in Venezuela, and it will include constitutional history and what brought about the current quote unquote legal climate in Venezuela that kind of sets the stage for both the government and the quote unquote opposition or electoral opposition to bring about the situation that we have right now.
Gracias. Si me permite, yo quisiera poder orientar una idea. Venezuela lleva 26 constituciones. Esta joven república lleva 26 constituciones. Debemos recordar que nosotros como país tenemos menos años que los Estados Unidos, que también es una nación joven. Entonces, de una constitución a 26. Otro punto importante con respecto a esa historia constitucional de Venezuela es entender que ninguna ha sido respetada. Todas nuestras constituciones han sido burladas una y otra vez. Muchas han contado con enmiendas o como la penúltima constitución que al nacer como constitución, el primer acto contra ella fue suspender las libertades económicas. Es decir, la institución constitución en Venezuela nunca ha sentado una realidad. Y habría que hacer un apéndice en especial con esta, que fue supuestamente elegida aprobada por voluntad popular y no tuvo más del 28.5% por la aprobación del electorado general.
Asimismo,
Okay.
me gustaría agregar que la actual constitución chavista nace de...
Let me get to Noel first. So let me try and do that justice. So first thing to acknowledge here is that Venezuela, being a younger republic, so less years since the founding than the United States, has had thus far 26 constitutions. And the other nugget here to get is none of those constitutions have been really followed or respected. It's usually been a process of let's change the constitution to adapt to power, to the power structure, and not the other way around. And the constitution that was before the one we have now, which is, technically speaking, still the valid one, the legitimate constitution. As soon as that was born, that system was born under that constitution, the first thing that was done was to violate people's economic rights. So, it was born in illegitimacy. Okay. And the current constitution that was approved by Voluntad Popular, which is the political party of the so-called interim government, or Juan Guaido, that was approved with less than 28.5% of the votes in and so it is a very much a problematic constitutional situation right now. Okay, go ahead.
Quería agregar que no solamente la actual constitución nace de una violación a la constitución anterior en lo referente a fondo y forma de su modificación, consulta o posterior modificación. Tuvimos un referéndum constitucional antinatural en el 2007, en el cual básicamente llevaron a la población a votar, a elegir entre ser libre o ser esclavo, entre aplicar el socialismo a máxima revolución o a media revolución, como estaba anteriormente. Ese referéndum lo ganó la opción del no a la reforma. Posteriormente, al mes de ejecutar esa consulta, el gobierno de Chávez, perdiendo esa elección, comenzó a modificar la constitución a su antojo vía decreto. ¿De cuál constitución estamos hablando?
Right, so it's important to remember that. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Okay.
Iba a ser una coletilla, no.
All right, so it's important to remember that the current constitution is not just a violation of the 1960s constitution, which was born, immediately being violated. It is also important to remember that in 2007, the population was submitted to a referendum to choose between slavery and half slavery, right? Because what you had was a ridiculous choice of pretty much just giving up the country to a communist legal system, if you can call it that. And what happened subsequently was that the no option won, right? So the negative option in that referendum won. However, the changes that were implied in the project that was submitted to referendum in 2007, those changes have been implemented nonetheless by presidential executive decree after another for all the years following that, and we're still seeing that unfold.
Aprovechando entonces de este punto, me gustaría conocer de ustedes cómo es la constitución del chavismo, cómo la describirían en un conjunto de pequeños conceptos.
Okay. So understanding this point, I would like for you guys to lay out what is the constitution of the chavismo, of the ruling party. How would you describe that sort of, bullet by bullet?
Es importante entender que esta constitución es más cercana al proceso constitucional europeo, lo cual la aleja de ser un marco jurídico y se convierte en un reglamento. La base para entender el desastre es que esta constitución tiene 350 artículos. 350 artículos en los cuales se pretende hasta legislar el derecho natural. Es una constitución que para más abolió la bicameralidad, lo cual genera este proceso de asambleas tumultuarias que alejan lo que debe ser la decisión legislativa y generan un proceso que va en contra de la regularidad democrática mínima.
Okay, so it's important to understand this constitution fits more with like a European sort of regulatory framework, and not like an actual constitution as we understand from the American process. And it'd be simpler for people to understand how absurd it is when you look at the amount of articles. It had 350 articles, and it seeks to legislate and regulate an insane amount of aspects of the Republican life, including it seeks to legislate natural law and natural rights, it functions day to day. It functions more as a framework rather than, it doesn't have the sanctity of a constitution. And keep in mind that it eliminates the bicameral system, so it allows for this one chamber assembly style legislative process, which really sort of dissolves the real republican nature of our system that was envisioned by the Venezuelan founders.
Adicionalmente a lo descrito por Noel, el daño es tan profundo que legislando el derecho natural introduce elementos como la propiedad social de la economía, que no es otra cosa que lo que es tuyo no es tuyo, sino que está sujeto a cualquier tipo de expropiación, robo, saqueo por parte del Estado o sus entes asociados para o no legales. Con lo cual, básicamente, estaba pensando justamente en el concepto de estos últimos 5 años de la Agenda 2030, como unos adelantados en el genocidio moderno a los cultores de esa constitución. Básicamente, el paralelismo que consigo es ese. Es un adelantamiento de épocas, 20 años atrás, 24 años atrás, a lo que se está poniendo en boga a nivel universal.
So there's a key aspect to this absurd attempt by this constitution to legislate and regulate natural law and natural rights, and one of those is this introduction of this very subtle introduction of this, or maybe not so subtle introduction of this social property concept. And what that ends up being, and it's such a vague definition, what that ends up being is it will allow for a tyrannical government to come in and say, we're going to expropriate, actually confiscate, and we're going to open the door to all sorts of abuses regarding property rights. And so the best parallel that I can find for that is when you look at the sort of the contemporary genocidal thrust of the sort of the global governance agenda with Agenda 2030. You can look at that. You can look at this precedent in our constitution, so-called constitution, be unfolding there even before, or kind of as a prelude to what we're seeing right now on the world stage.
es interesante y sobre todo con esta nueva constitución, si podríamos llamarlo de esta forma, hay dos hitos importantes en la historia reciente enmarcados en este elemento legal, si lo podríamos llamar de esta forma, que sería por un lado lo que es la ley electoral, que viola la Constitución en su origen, y por el otro lado tenemos la historia de lo que es el referéndum revocatorio. Quisiera iniciar primero con lo que es la ley electoral, cómo es esta ley electoral y cómo o por qué es violada o cómo o por qué viola la Constitución.
So in this understanding of the different aspects of this constitution, which are basically illegitimate, but then allow for the violation of itself. There's two aspects. So there's the electoral law or act, I think would be a better translation here, that they created under this system, and then the referendum mechanism that was also created under this constitutional scam. But I would like to start with a little bit of the history of this electoral act and understanding why it violates the constitution that they themselves put forth.
Quisiera ser un poco más amplio. Jorge tiene un aspecto interesante con respecto a eso de la ley electoral y la Constitución como tal. Pero es importante comprender que desde el nacimiento de esta Constitución, cada violación de la Constitución ha sido avalada por la oposición. Eso es importante y válido dejarlo claro. Todas las violaciones a la Constitución han sido acompañadas por la oposición. Un ejemplo a resaltar importante es que el vicepresidente no podía ser candidato presidencial. Eso está claro, es taxativo, no hay espacio de error en la Constitución. Pero Maduro era vicepresidente cuando Chávez fallece. Y inmediatamente fue candidato presidencial. Esa, como todas las otras violaciones a la Constitución, fue avalada por la oposición, al igual que lo referente a la ley electoral, a la ley de reforma electoral y la Constitución misma.
So we'd like to take a step back and look at violations to the Constitution from the point of view of the electoral law, and Jorge might get more into detail regarding the referendum part. But it's important it's crucial to remind folks that every violation to this Constitution from the very beginning has been accepted and tacitly or explicitly been supported and given the green light by the so-called opposition. And the Electoral Act is not an exception. It is rather part of the rule. And so, for instance, very clear example, when Maduro was first running for president after the death of the former tyrant Hugo Chavez, Maduro was not constitutionally allowed to run. And so that violation, which is part of the topic we're discussing here, that was perfectly accepted by the so-called opposition. And so every single step, has been supported and given basis by that force.
En el tema específicamente electoral, por orden cronológico, el referéndum revocatorio era un referéndum en la Constitución, según el artículo 72. Hubo un recurso de interpretación que fue introducido ante las Cortes por el economista Maxime Ross. La Corte Suprema, el Tribunal Supremo, lo admitió y convirtieron el referéndum en plebiscito. Es decir, antes tenías que tener, según la constitución vigente, tenías que tener una cierta cantidad de firmas para revocar al presidente electo. Convirtieron eso en un plebiscito, una elección ilegal que no aparece en la constitución. Fuimos todos a firmar, fuimos todos a votar y nuestros supuestos líderes opositores no solamente aceptaron esa violación constitucional, sino el resultado que fue evidentemente fraudulento, según estudios técnicos que ya deben estar cogiendo telarañas en algún cajón. Luego tenemos lo mencionado en la reforma del 2007, entre los temas introducidos en la reforma del Estado comunal y la reelección indefinida. La oposición lo aceptó, lo aplaudió, jugó con esas reglas. Y lo que comentaba Noel de la situación de la muerte del tirano Chávez con la situación de siendo Maduro vicepresidente y su incapacidad por vía constitucional de presentarse como candidato, básicamente está la sentencia del 10 de enero del 2013 del Tribunal Supremo, la cual Capriles, reciente candidato colaboracionista que contribuyó a la farsa en el 2012, dijo que bueno, que sí, que vamos a jugar con esas reglas. Son 3 hitos en menos de 10 años fundamentales para entender cómo una constitución es violada permanentemente por el gobierno y por sus socios que se hacen llamar oposición.
Okay, I might need help with this one, but so let's remind folks about 3 major violations of the Constitution that were 100% supported and just completely accepted by the current opposition, which has not really changed over the years. So number 1, right, when we had the mechanism of the revoking referendum, I guess I have to look up a dictionary translation for that. But in any case, a referendum that allows for the current president to be or sitting president to be taken out, right, legally. Immediately you had a violation of Article 72, and it was economist Maxim Ross who introduced an appeal or a resource in the Supreme Court. They call him the Supreme Tribunal in the new Constitution. French Revolution aside, the mechanism was turned into a sort of a yes or no referendum type. I think I'm not sure how to translate plebiscito, but it is maybe plebiscite, but I'm not sure. But basically, a yes or no question that did not have legal teeth to do what it was allowed to do from the point of view of the original spirit in the Constitution. So their own Constitution, right? And then you have the episode of 2007 in the so-called constitutional referendum, which was basically introducing reforms, quote unquote, that would basically do away with the nature of the republic altogether. And so you have the introduction of concepts like this communal state, right? That were clearly looking to dissolve the spirit of the republic. And that was that introduction, the introduction alone in the referendum was unconstitutional, but it was perfectly allowed by the opposition. So we came really close to accepting that in 2007. And then you have case number 3, which was what Noel was talking about, the acceptance of Maduro as a candidate to run in 2013 after Chavez's death. That was put out by the Supreme Court. And you have Enrique Capriles, a collaborationist of the highest degree in the opposition, just basically coming on saying, oh, yeah, sure. We'll play by those rules and we'll abide by the violation of your own Constitution. Hey, government, we'll do whatever you say. So.
Ahora, teniendo esta descripción de lo legal o paralegal del proceso venezolano, haré una pregunta. ¿Existe legitimidad en las instituciones de Venezuela?
No.
Okay, so looking at this process of the evolution of this sort of paralegal, I guess paralegal will not be the best thing in English, but you know, this sort of parallel legal system that has evolved under the umbrella of this unconstitutional constitution. It's hard. I mean, you can't make this up. It's so hard to it's so hard to convey that, you know, it almost sounds comical, because it kind of is comical, tragicomical. How would you describe the legitimacy of Venezuelan state institutions, or is there any legitimacy at all?
Bueno, si lo vamos al punto histórico, Venezuela ha sufrido constantemente una gran debilidad institucional. ¿Okay? Pero la entrada de la Constitución de 1999, se acabó formalmente el Estado de Derecho en Venezuela. Cada uno de los procesos electorales que se han vivido no tienen legitimidad alguna, y de esos procesos electorales absolutamente ilegítimos han nacido las supuestas instituciones actuales venezolanas. Por lo tanto, tenemos claro y específico que en Venezuela no hay institucionalidad alguna. No hay legitimidad alguna.
Okay, so fundamentally, we have to understand that historically speaking, Venezuela has always suffered from, you know, a strong degree of, or a very stark degree of institutional weakness when it comes to its state and republican institution, and I mean republican with a small r, for folks in the United States that may be confused with the party language. But having said that, within the context of that weakness, that pervasive systemic weakness, you have the fact that basically any sort of state, any sort of legitimate civil rights, political rights, economic rights state for the Republican system has been dissolved after 1999. So 1999, reminder, is when Chavez comes to power after the 1998 electoral process. That might have been the last electoral process that had some semblance of legitimacy and regulatory soundness to it. Now let's also remind folks that after that period, all of these electoral processes up until right now, they have all been illegitimate. So you know what you hear in the news is that, oh, this one was legitimate, but this one wasn't. No, they've all been illegitimate after the 1999 takeover. And so so it's crucial. It's absolutely essential to understand that all of the institutions that have been born out of that takeover in 1999 and all those illegitimate electoral processes are themselves illegitimate, right? All of those institutions have no legitimate politically and legal basis, because they've been all born under this failed, legal process. And so what you have is, you come to this point where it's almost all of it, or all of it is pretty much a legal scam.
La legitimidad en términos políticos únicamente no viene de su origen, sino de su funcionamiento, de su desempeño. Y no solamente los fraudes electorales han ido legitimando al gobierno y también a la oposición por ser parte de lo mismo. Es la entrega de la soberanía, la traición a la patria, la formación de grupos irregulares armados para someter a la población. Es un tema completo. La tiranía no tiene legitimidad porque va en contra de la naturaleza humana. La tiranía comunista va en contra de la naturaleza humana y aunque lo digan 100.000 personas, no tendrá legitimidad. Solamente la tendrá de parte de los cómplices. Gracias a ellos.
Right. So this is, the other side of the coin, of the same illegitimacy coin, right? So and Jorge reminds us that legitimacy in political terms is not just based on origin and the following of regulations and rules and norms. It is based also on the functioning, right? It is based also on the unfolding of action. So, or the execution rather, right? So you don't just have illegitimacy because of these, fraudulent electoral processes and these absolutely dubious and scam institutions and illegitimate legal basis. You have it also because you're setting up when Chavismo sets up a tyrannical communist government, right? A tyrannical socialist system. You go against human nature. So it's multiple aspects to that. It's the breakdown of the Republican system of governance. It's the handing over of national sovereignty. It's allowing irregular asymmetric groups to fester and populate our institutions and our territory. It's allowing all sorts of massive corruption to take place and criminal activity from the highest level of government, right? So when you set up a system like this, it doesn't matter if 30 million people vote for it, right? There's no voting in a system that it's absolutely antithetical to human nature and the human condition, and that's what a communist system is.
Bien, teniendo todo este panorama histórico y constitucional de Venezuela, me gustaría hacer una pregunta y que pudiesen describir de forma acotada, y sé que puede ser un poco difícil, ¿cómo definen al chavismo? ¿Qué es el chavismo?
Right. So looking at all these presidents for what we have today, and understanding the political and legal nature of this huge scam, right? That is Chavismo. I would like for you guys to as succinctly as possible, and that may be a stretch conceptually speaking, but how do you define Chavismo? And Chavismo being the movement that we associate with the figure of Hugo Chavez, which we understand that was just a tool of a larger project.
El chavismo es la continuidad de un proceso de destrucción de Venezuela en nombre del proceso socialista. En 1958 entra el espacio de la pseudo-democracia, justo con la inauguración de esa constitución a la que hacíamos mención en el 61, la cual lo primero que se le hace es quitarle las garantías económicas, y durante todo el periodo de vigencia de esa constitución nunca fueron reinstauradas. El chavismo es como la parte carnívora de este proceso. Veníamos de un proceso de izquierda vegetariana y entramos en un proceso de izquierda carnívora. Todo ha sido un proceso previo de debilitar las instituciones y ahora a terminarlas para poder instalar de manera democrática una tiranía comunista.
Okay, I love that definition in Spanish. Never expect for me to be as good in English, but Chavismo can be defined as the continuation of the revolutionary project of the destruction of Venezuela under the banner of socialism. And what we had before Chavismo can be defined as a pseudo democracy at best, in which what you get is a slow, gradual, progressive buildup in the weakening of the state and Republican institutions, so that when Chavismo comes in 1999, you can wipe out basically the functioning of the sovereign national state in Venezuela. And so Chavismo can be viewed, for folks that need a maybe like a metaphor, an allegory, we can look at it as the sort of the carnivore stage, right, of this socialist project that starts in 1958, and immediately, right? So for instance, in 1958, immediately you go into a dissolution of economic rights, right? So after the Constitution in the early 60s, you immediately go into dissolution of economic rights and of other civil rights and political rights, and so you set the stage for Chavismo. So what we had before can be kind of viewed as a vegetarian, the vegetarian left, right? The vegetarian socialism.
Lo de la explicación de Noel hay poco que agregar, solamente que no recuerdo el autor de la frase, pero decía que todo proyecto socialista degenera en tiranía. ¿Y la tiranía qué es? El gobierno de los peores, los criminales, los degenerados, una oclocracia.
So, it's probably not possible to add a lot more to the definition put forth by Noel, but can't remember which author it was, but he basically said every socialist process or project begets tyranny, right, or degenerates in tyranny, and tyranny, what it translates to day to day is, rule by the worst, right? It's I think ochlocracy, what would be the English for the Greek term, and it's basically it's mob rule. It is the government of the mob, and destruction of any semblance of order and meritocracy.
Excelente. Ahora, tenemos esta descripción del chavismo. Veamos un poco qué hay del otro lado de eso que se llama oposición. Entonces les preguntaría, ¿cómo opera la oposición frente a este aparato legal del chavismo que es ilegítimo de raíz o de origen?
Okay, so after looking at Chavismo politically and historically as a structure, right? Let's look at the so-called other side. And I would ask you guys, how does the opposition operate? And what is some of the dynamic that goes on between opposition and Chavismo that gives it its unique characteristics today? I may have butchered that, sorry.
Hay una palabra clave para poder describirlo: colaboracionismo. Tenemos cuenta, el colaboracionismo pudiésemos entender todo: la validación de las violaciones a la Constitución hasta el hecho de humillar a la población. Cada vez que se le ofrece a la población como liderazgo alternativo al chavismo, personajes pusilánimes, personajes que degradan al venezolano, personajes sin visión de futuro y personajes que profundamente comulgan con la idea socialista que nos trajo aquí. Entonces, el colaboracionismo es el eje para entender qué es lo que ha hecho la oposición durante todo este tránsito.
Okay, so the key word to decipher the opposition conundrum is collaborationism, collaboration. So this comes from the sort of the history of World War II, occupied France, and you had the collaborationist French, right? And they collaborated with the Nazis. So collaboration is this sort of the conceptual access to understand how these people operate in the so-called opposition. Now, this opposition doesn't just validate and accept and gives tacit agreement to all the violations and frauds and scams that Chavismo puts out there as a project. They also are bent on humiliating the population. So denigrating the populace by really sort of ridiculing their function as an alternative, quote unquote, right, to the harsh side of the system, with the ruling party, communist ruling party in there. And so you would see things like candidates, they throw out leadership and candidates out there that they represent the worst of our culture. They are effeminate. They are we mean this in a passive, just sort of really cowardice, a lack of vision, a lack of understanding of the future, and actually a lack of any sort of real leadership skills. So they are, this so-called opposition, they really are keen on presenting these figures as the only way out that the populace has, that is actually the worst alternative that you can think of.
A mí me viene la imagen de una fiesta, de una orgía, en la cual el chavismo pone la música y las drogas, en las cuales la oposición solamente quiere que ajusten el volumen y la cantidad de las mismas. Participa. Si participas, eres cómplice.
So Jorge says
Una metáfora.
Es lo que me viene a la mente. Es tan degenerado la imagen, el ambiente, que hasta ahí llegué. Hasta ese punto.
Right. So we have a good metaphor, and Jorge says, what comes to mind is an orgy, right? A degenerate party in which Chavismo puts drugs and alcohol in the setting, and then the so-called opposition, all they do is, they participate in the orgy, but all they do is they ask for, turn up the volume, turn up the drugs, turn up the alcohol, right? So, and the key thing is, the key thing here, from a just very strictly political point of view, is you're participating in that. So as the opposition, here's the main issue: you are partaking in that orgy, which is really the destruction of a country and of your own nation. So you're an accomplice. You're an accessory to the crime.
Tomando esta metáfora de la fiesta que hace Jorge, nosotros constantemente en Venezuela hemos sido llamados a una fiesta electoral. Por eso quisiera adelantarme con una pregunta sobre las elecciones en Venezuela y puntualizarla sobre cuántas elecciones o cuántos procesos electorales se han realizado en Venezuela durante el gobierno del chavismo.
So, going along this party metaphor, right? This orgy metaphor, we have been constantly we Venezuelans have been constantly called and invited, right, to the electoral party. And I don't mean party politically speaking, party as a festivity, right? So we constantly, right, the fiesta electoral, right, the electoral party. And so let's remind people how many electoral processes have gone on since this absolute takeover happened in 1999, and how has that evolved to give us the point where we're at right now in July of 2023?
Ok. Hay que tomar en cuenta que nosotros vamos para el cuarto de siglo de chavismo. Vamos para los 25 años. En esos 25 años han habido más de 29 elecciones, si incluimos enmiendas y lo demás. Y elecciones de carácter nacional. Pues si queremos separarlas de gobernadores y alcaldes, igual son de carácter nacional porque cubren toda la extensión. Aquí se llegó a hacer elecciones de carácter nacional abiertas para las direcciones sindicales. Es decir, no ha habido límite para burlar los espacios, los que deberían de ser espacios de su propia índole, ¿no? La burla ha sido decir que hay democracia porque hay elecciones. Y esa burla siempre ha sido acompañada por esa oposición. Esa es la clave para entender esto. Seguir vendiendo la idea de que hay democracia gracias a que cada vez se invita a la población a que vote.
Okay, so these numbers are key. So let's remind folks, the Chavismo regime has been in power for 25 years, right? So you know, if you take into account when they began as a movement, right? So or you know, when they officially launched. So we're talking about a quarter of a century here, and in that time span, we have had 29 plus, right? So over 29 electoral processes of a national nature, right? So we're talking nationwide, right? We're not, you know, you might want to add governor level, local level, right? State, local level, but just looking at it from a national perspective. And so, you know, you have had as a populace to witness how they throw in that package. They throw in there things like you know, electing the leadership for a certain labor union, for instance. And so it's like no political space of any institutional importance in the country has been left out of this electoral co-opting by the regime, right? And so, you know, instances where you want that sort of realm or sphere of power to be self-contained, you don't have that, because now, you know, you're subsumed into this electoral party obsession. And so the key here is to understand that they have tried their hardest to equate democracy with voting, right? So democracy with electoral process. And so, you know, the meta message here, the meta narrative here is that you have democracy because you have a lot of elections. And so you know, they've sold this idea to the world, right? And the opposition has been key and absolutely instrumental in corroborating that idea from their side, that, you know, we have a democracy because, heck, like, we vote all the freaking time.
Poco que agregar. Realmente no tengo nada de valor que agregar a lo que ha explicado Noel. Podemos pasar a lo siguiente, Pavel.
Perfecto. Entonces, viendo que hemos tenido más de 29 procesos nacionales, hemos tenido procesos de primarias dentro de la oposición, más adelante hablaremos de eso. A mí me surge entonces una gran pregunta. ¿Cómo se puede volver a validar nuevamente este sistema electoral en el que hemos hablado que de origen es ilegítimo?
Right. So given this scenario of repeated and weaponized fraud, that's just it's basically a solid block of illegitimacy from day one. how is it that they are trying, how is it that somebody can accept this new electoral process that they're proposing, and how can that have so any sort of legitimacy of origin or execution or functioning? How is that even possible?
Porque el asunto es seguir humillando a la población. Vamos a ponerlo, es quebrarle la lógica a la población. En el año 2004, en el caso del referéndum revocatorio, el fraude, lo correspondiente a la parte electrónica del fraude, está tan claro y demostrado que se utiliza como ejemplo en las universidades del mundo. Para explicar lo que es un fraude electrónico electoral, Venezuela, el caso venezolano del año 2004, es el ejemplo más claro. Se le dijo al país, eso fue un fraude. Diversos expositores de la estructura de oposición, incluyendo a María Corina Machado, insistieron, esto fue un fraude. Se llegó a elevar, a explicar hasta el Parlamento Europeo que no solo era un fraude, sino que se sabía por quién votaba cada persona. Es decir, se violaba el derecho al voto. Todo eso quedó demostrado. Pero igual se mandó a votar a la gente de la población. En el 2005, después del fraude del 2004, la gente se abstuvo, dijo no. Pero esa oposición se encargó de decirle al gobierno, no chico, tu asamblea es legítima, anda, tú tienes asamblea por 5 años más, cuando todo había sido desconocido. Durante ese periodo se volvió a llamar a la gente a votar. Referéndums, elecciones, más elecciones. Llegamos al 2018 y se dice no se puede votar porque el sistema es fraudulento. Y hoy estamos en el 2023 en unas condiciones aún peores que aquellas y se le vuelve a llamar a la gente a votar. Lo único es burlarse de la población para vestir de democracia a la tiranía.
Right. So you guys might want to interject here and help me out, but the key thing is the mockery of that's been made of the entire governance process in any sort of sane nation. This is a complete mockery, and it's basically an insult to the average person's intelligence. So the key thing here is that it is to humiliate the population, right? It's to humiliate the Venezuelan nation into submission by convalidating or rather accepting the terms, conditions, and functioning of this mockery. And so some key points in this history, 2004, right? So 2004, we talked about this, the revocation or the referendum that there's a constitutional mechanism to take out the president legally, the sitting president legally. That was recognized as a fraud. So it was voter and election fraud. It was absolutely demonstrated, proved scientifically, academically, statistically, whatnot. It's actually taught in universities around the world that study these things as a model of what a fraud looks like, with contemporary electronic voting methods and things like that. So and back then you have people like Maria Corina Machado coming on saying no, this was 100% fraudulent, right? And so it was even taken to the European Parliament back then, and it was brought up as, hey, you guys, if you want to know what a fraud looks like in the 21st century, here's 2004 Venezuelan referendum, right? So what happened was a year later you have the parliamentary elections or legislative elections in 2005, and the majority of the people, the majority of the voting population just did not vote, right? They didn't go to vote, right? I'm forgetting the key term here, but in any case, they withheld, right? So Chavismo takes over the National Assembly, and instead the opposition, right, instead of condemning that result as illegitimate, from taking from what they have said before, they said, oh, no, they went all around the world and they said, oh, no, it is perfectly fine, they can keep the National Assembly. And they told the population that they themselves had asked to abstain from voting. They told that population, they told the Venezuelan nation, hey, no, it's fine. They have a perfectly legitimate National Assembly. So what you have is all these processes from that period on, all these, presidential elections, all these legislative elections, all these referenda, all of these processes after that, they have all been fraudulent and demonstrably fraudulent. You lead up to 2018, where they say, oh, no, this one is illegitimate, so we're not going to participate. It's like, oh, in 2018 you finally come around to your senses and call this illegitimate process. So they do not participate in 2018. You get the 2019 crisis that leads up to the so-called constitutional crisis that leads up to the interim government facade or scam that happened with Juan Guaido, etc. And so what you have today is circling back. It's it's a recycle of, oh, no, actually, never mind what we said before, we're going to participate again, like just completely changing the traffic lights again.
Lo que comenta Noel de humillar al venezolano viene por parte del gobierno y oposición. Ambos son socialistas, ambos les gustan la miseria, les gustan los esclavos, les gusta la gente conformista. Unos de manera violenta, otros de manera didáctica o dialéctica. Y tiene que ver, en mi juicio, esta acotación que quiero hacer con la diferencia de responsabilidad entre las élites, en este caso las opositoras, de quienes se esperaba salidas reales a la crisis del país desde el año 1998, y los seguidores. Entre los seguidores, entre la gente, la población de calle, la ciudadano común, hay un desesperado amor por mentirse, hay una voluntad férrea de evadir la realidad. Y los otros socialistas que son expertos mintiendo, ahí tenemos la situación a nivel sociológico, lo que comentaba Noel de quebrar la lógica del venezolano. Y ese fenómeno se ve en otros países, inclusive, pero no entremos en esos detalles en este momento. Pero eso, básicamente, al bailar al mismo ritmo implica humillar de la misma manera al venezolano. Sea oposición o gobierno, ambos sistemas están hechos para eso. La humillación parte por ese insulto a la inteligencia que implica seguir diciéndole a la gente que hay salida electoral. No solo por la capacidad de fraude del chavismo, sino por la capacidad de su armamento y psicópatas que tienen esos armamentos. Lo cual implicaría que la salida pacífica, democrática, electoral no es otra cosa que una utopía.
Right. So a lot to unpack there. And one thing I left out before, for folks that don't understand the context. So both sides, right? We're talking electoral opposition and government, or ruling party, right? Ruling class. They're all socialist, right? So ideologically, they all share this common genus. They're not the same species, but they share this common genus of socialism, left-wing socialism. And so to understand this humiliation process, you have to understand that it's weaponized humiliation, right? So it's the validating this fraudulent mechanism year in and year out, right? It's part of this sort of meat grinding weaponized humiliation that seeks to break down the spirit of resistance and fighting and firmness in the population. Because socialists of all stripes and colors, they like weak, they like weak populists. They like dumb down, they like to dumb down the individual, weaken the individual, and they fundamentally they like obedient, subservient population. So so you have one style is a little bit more sort of didactical or didactic, and then you have the other style, much more frontal, the carnivore left, right? So much more frontal, violent, overtly tyrannical. But it's crucial to understand that they both complement each other and that they both feed on each other's actions and messages. And it's a well-rounded narrative that at the end of the day proves and 100% demonstrates that you cannot get out of this through democratic means, and that looking at that democratic way out is utopia, right? It's a complete fantasy, it's a complete farce, right? And it's really clear when you look at how the regime is ultimately governed from above, and the level of psychopath types that you have holding the gun, right? And the people that you have armed, that these guys have armed throughout the years to really execute their power, it's a very scary scenario. So clear that there's no way out of this by the message that they're giving out to the people.
Disculpa, Pavel. Para poder orientar al público estadounidense sobre la realidad y el ejemplo, coloquemos, hágase la idea de que el gobierno es por un Fidel Castro que se viste de democracia. Y quien ejecuta la oposición es un Bernie Sanders. Ahí se podrá entender cómo simplemente se comulga igual. Una carnívora y vegetariana, siendo ya Sanders bastante carnívoro. Imagínense, eso es lo que nosotros vivimos en Venezuela. Por eso es tan cerrada la idea de una alternativa.
So Noel interjects saying that a key way of translating this for an American audience might be to look at the government, right, the ruling party, as the execution phase of this monstrosity, and they're like a Fidel Castro, right? So imagine like a Fidel Castro. This is the execution side of things, right? The operational side of things. And then the people who, and this is a quote, a Noel quote, right? The people who are in charge of window dressing this project as a democracy day in and day out, they're sort of like a Bernie Sanders, right? So this electoral opposition, is fake opposition, whatever you want to call it. They're like a Bernie Sanders type, quote unquote democratic socialist vein of all this. And Bernie Sanders is very much, to the left, right? Very much a carnivore left guy. But think about it in those terms, right? So you have like a sugar-coated socialist giving sort of making it digestible for people what the carnivore left is doing. And so again, the farce is maintained, right? Because these two sides complement each other.
Bien. Ahora, teniendo estos conceptos de fraude y legitimidad, vamos a adentrarnos un poco más en el hoy, en un proceso del que se habla hoy en las noticias, o que ha sido referenciado en las noticias. Y quisiera comenzar por el personaje central de dichas noticias, que es María Corina Machado. Y entonces en este caso preguntaría, ¿quién es ella? ¿Quién es María Corina?
Okay, so we're looking at fraud and illegitimacy as the framework for understanding what's happening right now. And so they want to get us on board. They want us to jump on the new bandwagon of another electoral cycle, another electoral circus, rather. And so let's look at the current news, and let's look at what at the main object or figure that's being, it's being elevated in the news cycle, in the current news cycle, and this is the figure of Maria Corina Machado. Who is Maria Corina Machado, also known as MCM and MSM, and what's her background?
Importante es entender que es una más de las tantas figuras que han sido parte de todo este proceso, ¿no? Durante todos estos años. En el caso particular de ella se da a conocer a través de un aparato que ayudó a demostrar el fraude electoral. Entonces, esa es su primera bandera. La primera bandera fue organizar a la gente para el referéndum y demostrar que posterior al referéndum hubo un fraude electoral. Después empieza ahí mismo, temprano, ya en el 2006, para las elecciones del 2006, después del fraude electoral del año 2004, después de la abstención del año 2005, empieza a sonar su nombre como presidenciable, como candidata en ese momento. No creció, aquella elección, el candidato fue Manuel Rosales. Después siguió alertando sobre el sistema electoral, pero al mismo tiempo armando una estructura, siendo partícipe de la estructura política tradicional que estaba vistiendo de democracia esto. Tanto así que se lanza a diputada en el año 2010 y alcanza a ser la diputada más votada en aquel entonces. Por supuesto, se lanza en el circuito favorito de la oposición, es decir, donde hay más oposición de manera formal, direccionada, y en un área de Caracas donde el fraude como tal no es necesario hacerlo, porque de hacerlo se vería muy mal. Es mejor dejar que corra allí el triunfo opositor. Su camino sigue siendo el electoral normal y a su vez facilita leyes que son contrarias a la libertad. El primer ejemplo es facilitar la ley desarme, la ley que quería en contra de la segunda enmienda de los Estados Unidos. Ella fue una de las protagonistas principales de esto. Después pasa a estar inhabilitada, no puede reelegirse como candidata, como diputada en el año 2015, y ella coloca a una persona de su confianza como candidato y dice de manera clara: ella es mi voz en el Parlamento. Esta persona lo que hace es seguir lo mismo que hacía María Corina antes, que era seguir toda la onda de esa oposición que venía legitimando cada una de estas cosas. Y ahora, después del 2018, donde ella es de las que levanta las banderas de que hay un fraude, no se puede participar, ahora mueve todo este aparato de las supuestas primarias para poderse hacer ella líder de la oposición. Hay una tesis que dice que el liderazgo tiene que ser expuesto electoralmente. Es algo que ella quería hacer hace tiempo, una elección para elegir un líder de oposición. Y eso es lo que está buscando ahorita con las primarias. Aprovechar que ella es un foco internacional, alguien ya reconocido, para poder tener ese liderazgo de la oposición.
Okay. Okay. Please interrupt. So this is kind of the political criminal bio of Maria Corina Machado, right? So she starts out, she jumps on the national stage in 2004 by way of denouncing and calling out the fraud that took place in the referendum process back then. And we said that, she was one of the big banner holders of this idea of the fraud. Now, moving on to 2005, and the abstention that happened, and the amount of people that didn't vote and delegitimized the process, she was part of that, calling that, supporting that idea of delegitimizing the process. But then she kind of grows as a political figure a little bit, and so in 2006 she actually runs for president, right? And she does not win. Rosales wins, and so it's important to, it's key to understand that she's just another tool of this machine, right? She's just another figure that's been put out there to serve as a face of this opposition, collaborationist opposition. Okay, so after 2006, she grows into that system, that she grows politically within that collaborationist opposition machine. And leading up to 2010, she actually runs as a National Assembly delegate, right? It would be the House of Representatives here in the United States, right? As a representative, and she wins. She's one of the most voted candidates. She wins really easily, and she wins in a district, in an electoral district in Caracas that it's opposition dominated, very sort of anti-government, and she wins easily. And so once she's in the National Assembly, she partakes in, well, you can call it the further dismantlement, the further dissolution of civil, political, economic rights in the country that the opposition has been a part of, even from a legislative perspective. So one of the things she took part in was the Disarmament Act, or Disarmament Law, which, in a context like the American context, that would go directly against the Second Amendment, for instance, right? So the legitimate right to keep and bear arms, right? So she takes part in that process as a legislator, and many other really absurd, dangerous things, detrimental things to the nation. And so then she runs in the 2012 primaries, further validating the electoral fraud process. And so you get to 2018, when most of the electoral opposition calls out the fraud and says, oh, actually, yeah, we're gonna, we're not gonna participate this year. And so she's part of that. She amplifies that message. However, she's always wanted, and she's been part of other projects and proposals out there, like another constitutional assembly and things like that. So she's just constantly validating the electoral process by, and at the same time saying it's illegitimate, right? So completely contradicting position. But then she's been wanting to do this, carry out this idea of becoming the leader, right? The leading figure in the opposition, and she already has a platform, right? So in 2015, she couldn't run because she was she wasn't allowed to run by the government, by the regime. She wasn't allowed to run in 2015, so she puts in place, a placeholder in the National Assembly, and it's just somebody who just does whatever she wanted, right? Which is validating this dismantlement of institutions. But she's always wanted to use her platform as, oh, let's call out for the leader, let's elect the leader of the opposition. So there's this theory out there that, if you're the real leader of this thing, you're gonna get voted in there, right? And so she finally gets her way with this idea of the primaries, that's out right now, that's out in the open. And so of course she's running in that, she's participating in that, and she's one of the leading figures in that new mockery of elections.
Recuerdo hace unos cuantos años que definimos a María Corina Machado como mis incoherencias. Un día decía que no hay que validarlo el fraude electoral. Al día siguiente le daba por ir a elecciones. Luego, en la siguiente elección, utilizaba el mecanismo del CNE para las primarias internas de la oposición, legitimando el proceso desde el inicio de la campaña electoral. Y en los últimos tiempos está cercana ideológicamente en temas de familia y de aborto con Nancy Pelosi o Gloria Álvarez, muy a favor del aborto indiscriminado y muy a favor de eso llamado ideología de género y toda esa agenda parte de la misma Agenda 2030. O sea, está con el Foro Económico Mundial, es un agente más de lo mismo, que juega a lo mismo que los demás de la oposición, juega a lo mismo que el gobierno. Socialismo, marxismo cultural, destrucción de la familia, la economía keynesiana, un país sin fronteras, sin soberanía, el mismo formato, cada actor de la manera que mejor le parece. Pero María Corina es eso, más de lo mismo, con mucha mejor presencia, pero más de lo mismo.
Right. So Maria Corina plays a distinct role, but at the same time, she's just more of the same. So it's crucial to understand, you know, let's just rewind a few years ago, and actually more than a few years ago, and you know, we had already called her Miss Incoherence, right? So you know, we already knew her as Miss Incoherence, and Miss Incongruence, right? And so you know, she would call out the fraud, voter and electoral fraud. Should be a, you know, very strong voice denouncing that. And next day she would come out and say, no, never mind that. You know, let's participate in the primaries or the, you know, the new presidential election or whatever. And she would even support things like having the regime's electoral supervision body, which is another absurdity in this constitution. You know, we call it the CNE, right, in Spanish. Consejo Nacional Electoral is the National Electoral Council, which is really like it's supposed to be like a separate, you know, Republican power, but it's really just a proxy institution for the government to. It's a ministry of elections basically, and so she would she would validate participating in primaries like that. So from the outset, she would validate the fraud, right? And partaking in that. And so but the way that we really prove again and again that she's just part of the same thing, right? She's just another, you know, another brick in the wall, right? Another cog in the machine is her ideology. Her ideology is all over the place, right? So she, you know, she's been portrayed as like a sort of a neoliberal capitalist, something like that. We don't really know, which might explain some of the attraction that she has within Republicans here in the United States. But ultimately, she's more like a Nancy Pelosi type. She's very much pro-abortion, for instance, indiscriminate abortion. In many issues, you know, economic and social. She's kind of like the Gloria Alvarez figure. I think she's from Guatemala. You know, people in Latin America know her as like this sort of like, you know, libertarian left, for lack of a better term, figure. And so she really is sort of in line with the Agenda 2030, you know, project. And so it's a lot of the World Economic Forum type of proposals out there. You know, it's the one world, right? It's the economic reset. It's the, you know, world without borders type of thing where, you know, that's going to be like a global governance structure and things like that. And so again, you know, it's just really it's like a more presentable sort of visually you know, acceptable leftist figure, but it's a less leftist figure at the end of the day, right? And her incongruence just feeds into that framework.
Teniendo entonces esta idea de quién es María Corina, un poco cómo ha sido su participación como la oposición y en qué eventos políticos ha tenido relevancia, yo les preguntaría entonces, ¿por qué el gobierno quiere a María Corina como una figura?
So looking at who she is, who Maria Corina Machado is, right, and MCM, and looking at her history, and mind you, we've only touched the surface of some of the nasty things that she's participated in since she's become a political figure back in 2004. So looking at that record, that is not at all flattering. Let's try and understand why does the regime want her as a candidate, right? Why has she been propped up to be the leading figure in this new cycle or circus?
Hay que entender el gran desgaste que tiene las figuras de oposición, no solo en el país, sino afuera. Venezuela, el mundo viene a hacer un gran esfuerzo al intentar apuntalar lo que fue el interinato y la figura de Juan Guaidó. Entonces, ese desgaste es pesado, ya es fuerte. Y el gobierno entiende que ya eso huele mal. María Corina siempre ha estado en una posición de sí, pero no. Ha ido acompañando todo, pero diciendo no, yo soy crítica a. Y eso siempre le ha colocado como una cosa aparte de lo mismo, pero simplemente es lo mismo. Ella tiene la oportunidad de tener un respaldo internacional, un reconocimiento internacional. Es gracioso que mucho de ese reconocimiento es gracias a estar de la mano de Leopoldo López, que es quizás el protagonista principal del desastre de lo que fue el interinato. Entonces, ¿por qué el gobierno le conviene esto? Porque es darle foco internacional a que en Venezuela existe participación democrática y que no se quede como lo que fue el 2018, donde simplemente los socios del gobierno hicieron lo propio y vistieron al gobierno de democracia cuando la oposición se abstuvo, ¿no? Hoy la oposición está supuestamente participando, una discusión constante, y eso dice, entonces hay democracia. Es algo muy atractivo para el gobierno colocar una figura que ya tiene renombre internacional como contraparte para poder validar el hecho político de que en Venezuela la democracia está viva.
Okay. So a key concept that folks need to understand: the great amount, the great level of watering down of the legitimacy. They've gone through sort of an attrition process with these opposition figures, right? So they have been discredited to the nth degree, and so they have, their platforms are toothless at this point. They have been just really kind of broken down in the impact and the legitimacy that they can have worldwide, right? So the opposition made this huge deal from 2019 of propping up this interim government project with Juan Guaidó, and so after that, it's just really, really hard to sort of bring back from the same magical bag, right? It's really hard to, from the magician's hat, it's really hard to bring out something original and new, and so she kind of serves that purpose. She has an international platform that she has been building for years, that kind of allows her to present herself as a critical alternative, but it's allowed, she's been allowed to survive because she's been yes but no, right? No but yes. So ultimately she's just more of the same. However, she has been vocally critical here and there about certain things, right? So like 2018, she criticized that the presidential elections, and the regime figured out, shoot, after 2018, like all of these guys did not participate, only our partners in crime, like direct partners in crime, participated in that and kind of gave it some sort of, semblance of logic. But, remember, this is a war on logic, right? On the logic of the population. So, what you have is a person like Maria Corina Machado who seems critical to some circles, in some audiences. And so, it is very attractive, very appealing, very convenient for the government, for Chavismo, to present a candidate like this that has some sort of connection to an international audience that can seem critical. So you have this, you can sustain, even in 2023, you can sustain this veneer of democracy and participatory democracy in Venezuela, where, it's key to understand, for instance, she has been propped up to the level that she is now by being best buddies with Leopoldo Lopez. And Leopoldo Lopez was one of the key figures behind this absolute obscenity of the interim government in 2019 onwards. And so, under that shadow, she's been able to kind of mushroom into this figure that the government really, really wants, so that they can tell the world, hey, we don't just have, dummies and mannequins as electoral figures. We have an actual critic of the regime running for president.
En mi criterio, todo pasa por el desgaste, lo que comenta Noel. Aprovechan la figura de una mujer que es preparada, de muy buen ver, sabe hablar, eso es innegable. Con lo cual el chavismo tendría dos opciones: o comportarse como siempre ha sido el chavismo, o darle cierta carta blanca con escaramuzas más o menos frecuentes para hacerla ver como que representa un gobierno, un peligro para la tiranía, alguna amenaza, algún hecho de violencia controlada, para elevarla al nivel de opinión popular, que la gente vote por ella, o hacer el fraude a favor de ella en primaria. El chavismo le da igual, eso depende cómo tengan la jugada preparada ellos. Luego nos lleva a dos escenarios: participa en el fraude como candidata, reconoce el fraude electoral a favor del gobierno y mata a la resistencia psicológicamente. Ella, la candidata más dura, la más fuerte, recuerdo su eslogan anterior: voto duro, voto por María Corina. Si aceptan los resultados, el país se apaga nuevamente y el chavismo ha reconocido otra vez como democracia gracias a los colaboracionistas de la tiranía. Pero si por alguna razón tenemos una transición negociada de la cual no sabemos, y María Corina se viste de Violeta Chamorro, con las diferencias del caso, Chamorro venía de las filas de Ortega directamente, María Corina no. Pero los libros de historia no están escritos aún y todo se escribe continuamente. Supongamos que María Corina le dejan ganar las elecciones y no hace lo que hay que hacer, como tampoco lo hizo Chamorro en su momento. El país es ingobernable, volvería al chavismo con fuerza renovada al poco tiempo. ¿Por qué el gobierno quiere a María Corina? Eso da mucha tela que cortar, estamos teorizando en base a historia, en base a cierta creatividad, pero si la quiere es por algo. Y nada bueno para el país.
Right. So, Jorge gives some interesting projections here, because we have to keep in mind, right? She is kind of the better looking of all these terrible options, including her, right? She's kind of the better looking. She's well spoken. She has a university degree. I mean, she more presentable. But ultimately, it's very predictable that Chavismo might act to prop her up in different forms and following different methods. So they can do kind of like the classical, because she's right, technically she isn't or, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but she's not allowed to run, right? Legally, right now, is she está habilitada o inhabilitada?
She's unhabilitated.
Right. So she's legally not allowed to even run for president. So
Correct.
so right. So so you know, this is kind of part of the propping up process, right? Chavismo might go into sort of full gear, full Soviet gear, and just, you know, do whatever they typically do, or they might allow some sort of, you know, limited escalation or controlled violence scenario where, you know, you have some skirmishes here and there, and she, you know, her people are hurt, or, you know, maybe put in jail temporarily, things like that, where she is now sold as the hard candidate, right? Like the hard, you know, this is like a real threat to the tyranny, right? So, and she had that slogan back in the day. It was, you know, vote hard, right? Vote MCM, vote hard, right? So she can sell herself as, oh, and by the way, female, right? So they, you know, they can really take advantage of this level of attrition that the other figures have, and elevate her as, oh, you know, it's the female hardcore opposition female candidate, right? So they might go into this method of limited, you know, aggression against her. But this might lead to a bifurcated scenario, or two different, you know, possible alternatives, where in one scenario she you know, gets defeated in the elections, right? Quote unquote defeated, and she loses. Then she calls out, maybe she calls out the fraud, but then, you know, Chavismo gets reinstated anyway, and she accepts that. And so the idea in that scenario would be to absolutely break, you know, absolutely fracture the psyche of the Venezuelan, you know, sort of resistance position in the country. The other scenario might be a little bit like the Nicaraguan context. And for folks that don't know, right after the Civil War, there was this figure coming out from the extreme left, from the, you know, Ortega, from the party that's now in power in Nicaragua. But back then, you know, they were defeated in the Civil War, or quote unquote defeated in the Civil War. But a candidate came out of those of that group that then was sold as an opposition candidate, Violeta Chamorro. Look up Violeta Chamorro in Google, and you will realize that, you know, obviously with historical differences from one scenario to the other, but she basically, she got to power, right, after you know, some elections there, and she could not hold on to that power, right? So the country, Nicaragua, became an absolute quagmire of disorder, and so she wasn't able to hold the government together, and so, you know, the extreme left came back to power, and then, you know, 2003, you get, I think it was 2003, you get Daniel Ortega, and well, you still have him and his wife destroying Nicaragua from above. So you might get a scenario where Maria Corina becomes like a Violeta Chamorro. She, you know, basically hands over the country to Chavismo. Chavismo would look attractive again, maybe in that scenario. And so, as bad as it sounds, and she, you know, they could be reinstated with new vigor, but you know, we're theorizing here, but why does the government want her? I mean, it's really, there's a lot of explanations in the future projections that we can make.
Disculpa un
Bien.
segundo,
Sí.
David. Es importante aclarar lo que es la figura de las inhabilitaciones. Es una figura jurídica que se sacó el gobierno, que no está tipificada en la Constitución, que nace tan solo dentro de la ley de Contraloría, y no es una figura nueva en el ejercicio del gobierno. El gobierno ni tampoco es una figura que se utilice solo para el candidato presidencial. El gobierno ya la ha usado durante mucho tiempo, tanto así que el caso de Superlano, uno de estos candidatos, está inhabilitado como cuando ejercía como diputado. y esa misma inhabilitación le es válida hoy, supuestamente, y sigue siendo candidato. Capriles está inhabilitado como para el ejercicio, para presentarse como candidato electoral para cualquier cargo de elección pública, al igual que Guaidó, y tienen inhabilitaciones por 15 años. María Corina estaba inhabilitada en el año 2015 por 12 meses solamente, pero recientemente la Contraloría dice que no, ella tiene la misma inhabilitación de 15 años, sin ningún tipo de justificación, simplemente en un correo electrónico la Contraloría explica de que ella está nuevamente inhabilitada. Es importante entender que las inhabilitaciones el mismo gobierno las puede levantar a su gusto. Sí, ya lo hizo con el caso de Manuel Rosales. Manuel Rosales quedó inhabilitado, hasta estuvo preso, y después lo volvieron a habilitar para que se lanzase a la gobernación del Zulia, donde es actual gobernador. Y todavía hay ruido sobre que pueda ser precandidato presidencial en la actualidad. Entonces, la inhabilitación es a discreción del consumidor.
Right. So Noel points out the interesting figure, the interesting instrument of not allowing people to run for public office in Venezuela. So this is a concept, an instrument that's not typified anywhere in the Constitution. It came about with the oversight law. And so folks keep in mind that government oversight body in Venezuela is really an instrument of the people in power. So there's no such thing as oversight. But now this instrument has been used just, almost fire at will, right? I mean, this instrument has been used against all sorts of figures, and it can be turned on and off by the government at any point, and at any time they want, really. And you get people like Maria Corina. So, but it's not just for presidential candidacies. They have used it for people in public office, like sitting in a position in the past. So, for instance, one of the candidates in the so-called primaries that are being proposed now, that Superlano, right? That guy was not allowed to, he was not allowed to run. Might not be the best translation, but in any case, he was not allowed to run again while he was as a representative in the National Assembly, and so that that instrument applies today. But he's one of the candidates in the primary. So you get people like Capriles, right, who were not allowed to run, and then you get these 15-year-long applications of that instrument where like Capriles wasn't allowed to run, right? But he still runs again and again, right? And so you get people like Manuel Rosales, right, who ran in 2006. He was applied this instrument of not allowed to run, but then they took it off, and so he was allowed to run again. And so later on, right? And so it's even rumored that he might be running in the next presidential election. So you get again and again this turning on and off. And so Maria Corina in particular, she was applied that instrument in 2015 for 1 year. But now the so-called oversight body comes on and says, and just kind of just sends an email and says, hey, you're actually not allowed to run now for 15 years. So she's been handed the 15-year treatment, but there she is. She's number one in the primaries situation.
Teniendo entonces ahora todo este recorrido que hemos hecho, tanto el histórico de la constitucional y legal de Venezuela, lo que es el chavismo, la oposición, les preguntaría sobre una conclusión. ¿Qué podrían concluir de esta conversación que hemos tenido el día de hoy con algunos pequeños puntos?
Okay, so after laying out this nefarious history of chavismo and the opposition, and the electoral opposition and how they are complementary, and how they have step by step geared us up for the moment that we're at now as a nation. What would you guys conclude of all of this? Give us a little bit of a wrap up answer as a conclusion here, please.
Yo creo que es fundamental que se entienda que no hay, y es importante entender que no ha habido posibilidad de salida alguna dentro del marco jurídico, legislativo o electoral en Venezuela. También es importante entender que este control social que ha sido tan fuerte durante este cuarto de siglo no se hubiese podido hacer sin la ayuda de la oposición, sin la ayuda de esa estructura de oposición. También es importante explicar que esa ayuda de la oposición ha contribuido de manera formal a que la única alternativa que hace posible extraer un proceso revolucionario, que es decir, la policía es de una nación, que es la Fuerza Armada, se deteriorara, se pudiese. Entonces, queda Venezuela hoy en una situación frente al proceso geopolítico como una moneda de cambio. Venezuela casi que está sin poder ejecutar por ella misma su destino, sino que frente a los intereses globales, en algún momento sea válido decir, ahora es Venezuela importante, vamos a hacer que produzca petróleo y que tenga libertad, vamos a quitar la tiranía. Dejen de ayudarla, vamos a quitarla. Pero mientras tanto, Venezuela forme parte de este ajedrez geopolítico y tenga esta estructura de liderazgo político, tanto de gobierno como oposición, el destino de Venezuela es negativo. ¿Es recuperable Venezuela? 100%. Cuando entendamos que nada de esta estructura política es válida para el mañana. Cuando entendamos que la tiranía es tiranía y tiene que ser extraída.
Okay, so fascinating points. I cannot do them justice, but so 5 points here, right? So number one, right? What we have is a scenario, very real scenario, in which there is no legal, political, electoral, cop out, or even judicial cop out way out of this gridlock, right? Of this absolute nightmare situation, because the regime has co-opted every single space and instance and mechanism from the very beginning, right? So nothing is legitimate. Institutions are absolutely just an instrument of those in power, right? And so there is no way out of that system within the rules and mechanisms of that system. Now, the point number two is that the main actor, the main force in charge of window dressing and sugar coating, and then subsequently validating and allowing for this situation to take hold and take shape during 25 years is the collaborationist opposition. This would not have happened, could not have been allowed, would not have been able to take place without the direct involvement of this thing that we still call the opposition in Venezuela. Okay, and so number three, it's key to understand that the one actor that constitutionally, right, and logically and reasonably would have needed to be encouraged and elevated to a role in which they would have been able to perform their constitutional duty of preventing this nightmare from taking place, the armed forces has been completely denigrated, disintegrated, and allowed to rot, allowed to absolutely rot to a point where it's almost insolvable, right? And it has been castrated from being able to do its constitutional mandate and duty, right, as the guarantor and the keeper of national sovereignty. Now, a country like Venezuela, what that translates to is a country like Venezuela has lost control of its own destiny. Okay, and so the Venezuelan nation is lost in the ocean of destiny, and what we have become as a country is a bargaining chip within the geopolitical chess game that's going on right now, right? Between world powers, special interests, supranational forces and organizations. And so in a scenario where it is understood that, Venezuela is an attractive investment, it's an incredible market for future development, and it would be the crown jewel of the Western Hemisphere, or the developing world in the Western Hemisphere. In a sane scenario, world powers would realize, well, the only way to get this country back up is you have to extract this tyrannical regime, right? We have to get them out of power, right? And we have to stop this situation from happening, and so that would be the way to do it. But that alternative, that way out, right, within this geopolitical context and chess game, does not happen because, right, what they see, what the geopolitical big players see is, well, it's a country that can no longer take the reins of its own future. And so, Noel's final point, fifth point, is the only way to understand a real way out of this situation is to understand that this is a tyrannical regime, right? To understand its tyrannical nature, to understand its ideological umbrella of socialism, communism, Marxism, Leninism, whatever you want to call it, Marxism, chavizmo, and to see it for what it is, called a spade, and really understand that without the extraction of this criminal entity in power, there's no way out of this nightmare scenario.
Yo me quedo con la conclusión de Noel. No hay nada que agregar ahí. El concepto redondo que se ha manejado durante muchos años, ahí no hay nada que agregar.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, we all agree with Noel's concept here. It's really tough to it's really tough to transmit this message to people without using the proper terms and calling a spade like Noel and Jorge have done. So yeah, I'm adding a little bit here on my rant, but it really has to be, it starts with accepting reality. That's the way that I would characterize this problem.
Bueno, me gustaría agradecer por la participación y por la compañía de Noel y de Jorge, grandes amigos, buenos compañeros, y a David por permitirnos participar acá en su espacio.
Okay, thank you. Well, Pavel says it's been a pleasure and an honor, and he would like to thank the participation of Jorge and Noel. They're great friends. They are hardcore patriots, experts in the field, people with experience for real And I would invite you guys in the channel also to visit their channels. Noel has the Venezuela Vetada site, and Jorge has his own blog and channel himself. And so yeah, it's been a great opportunity for me and for Gueni Vision to incorporate this talk. I think it's timely, and I also think that it is not about bashing an individual figure. It is not about, you know, deconstructing the ideology of an individual person. It's about calling out this this cycle, right, that we have been victims of, and it's about calling out the forces, right, that are not about individual people. It's the forces behind these people that are running the show, and to understand that nothing that comes from within those forces is going to get us anywhere. It's never going to get the ball moving, because their objective is to keep the ball where it is, and it's the annihilation of a country. And so with that, I leave, and I'm not going to add that in Spanish. So thank you very much, and take care.